network in general. The network was founded in 2011 to raise awareness of challenges women often encounter in the world of applied geophysics and to find solutions to these challenges. We aim to grow a community for mutual support among female SEG members, and we encourage more participation and leadership by women in geoscience. So this webinar series aims to do that as well, to provide a platform for more women speakers within and outside the network to speak on various topics. Dr. Sarah is a project geophysicist for a mineral exploration company in Vancouver, British Columbia. She has vast experience in conversion from potential fields, non-seismic methods, and also processing and identification of airborne EM data. She was also the technical key contact for SEG Mining Committee, the chair for Women Geoscientists in Canada, and previously the director for British Columbia Geophysical Society. And outside work, she's a passionate mountain biker and sports ambassador. And today, she will speak on gender diversity in geoscience. So without any further ado, Sarah can start the talk.
Great, thank you for the introduction. I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you guys today about Women Geoscientists in Canada and a bit about what we do and what we think we could still do more of. So my talk today is called Gender Diversity in the Geoscience Industry, and still more to do. So I'm going to start off just a little bit with coming from a Canadian perspective, and we approximately have 12,600 geoscientists in Canada based on their latest census data. So that encompasses geologists, geochemists, and geophysicists. And I usually start by asking, how many do you think are women? 10%, 20%, 30, 40%, any guesses? So usually if we have a bit more of a interactive setting, then people can pipe up and let them know, but we'll just move on. But in reality, we have about 19% that are women. So this is Canada-wide. The US might be a bit different. Obviously, the US has 10 times more people in general than Canada does, so the number of geoscientists will be a lot larger. But I think overall, we see this hovering around 20% in the industry for women participation in our field. Okay, so Women Geoscientists in Canada, our primary mission is to retain women in geoscience and reach gender diversity at all career levels. So by all career levels, I mean starting from very introductory, right out of school, all the way up to senior positions and boardrooms. And our strategy can be narrowed down to 4 things. We have an online community to foster relationships and belonging. I'll share the details to that later in the presentation. We encourage participation to elevate women into leadership positions. We demand action from societies and companies to work on specific barriers. And we're working on a mentorship program so that we can help young geoscientists make it through the first couple of years and really have a career in geoscience. So a bit about us, we're quite new. We started just after the Exploration 17 conference, which was in October 2017, so a year and a half ago. We've created a Slack community and a website. We've held 7 meetups at different conferences in Vancouver, Toronto, and as well as in Keystone in Colorado. We've presented talks in Saskatoon, Sudbury, Vancouver, and Ottawa. This is to either geophysical societies or universities that have geoscience programs. We co-sponsored a public speaking workshop and sponsored 2 students to attend. We put out a monthly newsletter and blog post, and I'll talk a bit more about that later as well. We're on social media, and please follow us there. And we're also having blossoming alliances with other groups like Women in Mining BC, Women in Mining Canada, the Me Too Mining Association, as well as some of the professional societies that we have in Canada, such as the Association of Professional Geoscientists in Ontario, Engineers and Geoscientists in BC, both SEGs, the Exploration Geophysicists one and the Economic Geologist ones, and then some of the other groups such as the Association of Mining Exploration BC and PDAC, which is the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada. We have 6 geoscientists on our board, and we do monthly executive meetings. We're spread across Canada, actually. So we meet online, and we've met in person as well at all the different conferences. And just recently, we were able to federally incorporate ourselves as a not-for-profit. So moving forward, that will allow us to do some fundraising and really keep going with the things we've been able to do in our first year. So today I want to talk about 3 things that bug us. And these are things that are actually going to bug me. And, this is we're researching these things and we're starting to talk about them. I don't necessarily have all the solutions about them, but we have ideas and recognizing that these things prevent women from reaching their full potential. So first of all is retention. Then I'm going to talk about our image, and then finally representation. So starting with retention. So if we look at the data, and this is across the USA and Canada, about 40 to 50% of undergraduate geoscience degrees are awarded to women. But the workforce, at least within Canada, only sits about 19-20%. So really what happens after graduation, where we're pretty much at parity to losing that large population of women geoscientists. And we call this the leaky pipeline. And basically the question is, how do we stop this happening? So retention is a key issue in our industry. And what we've seen is that this leaky pipeline really affects women in the first 5 to 10 years after graduation. So this is really where the young geoscientists drop out. And that's for a variety of reasons, and it's complex, and it's not necessarily really easy to find a solution for it, but I think over time we can start addressing some of these issues. So first of all, for industry, a tremendous cost has gone into training newly hired geoscientists. There's always going to be a year or 2 of after you hire someone brand new out of school to get them up to speed of how a company works and make sure that they're productive. And so you're investing in that person. So for industry, it's really valuable to make sure that you retain those people and that investment that you started with. We also noticed that our industry is aging. We have a lot of people who are set to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. And so we really need this younger generation to come in and stay in. And I'd also like to say that different people bring fresh ideas and new ideas, and especially in an industry like whereas I come from, we're a mining perspective in Canada, but in the US there's a big oil contingency. If we can have different ways of thinking and different ideas, we can come up with different solutions and usually come up with new ideas, especially in an age where there's a lot of talk about climate change and being more efficient with our resources. And then there's also been research that have shown that diverse teams tend to be more productive and more risk averse. So if we have more balance on the team, more women, more minorities, more people from different backgrounds, those teams tend to perform better and have less risk. So for an industry or a company, that should also be an additional benefit that to keep these kind of teams together. So our thoughts on this is to connect women with each other. So I mentioned Slack before. It's an online community. It's closed, so you need an invitation to be able to get in, but we have, it allows us to have different threads where you can have communications with people, we can share things, we can discuss things, and you can also private message each other on it. So I'll share the link to that at the end if you want to join. We're starting a mentoring program so that we can connect women with one another. And I don't want this just to be one-on-one mentoring. We're also considering mentoring circles where, we'll have a little meetup in Vancouver or Toronto or Ottawa and have a bunch of women come together and talk about different things that they're experiencing, as well as learning events. So, for example, we had this public speaking workshop in Saskatoon in December, things like that. And I also like the idea of bidirectional mentoring. It's not just the standard mentor-mentee relationship, but also that a mentee can teach a mentor a lot of things too. So there's that information going both ways. And then I think it's also important that we have people to look up to and envision yourself as. So because there's not many women in the role, I'm a very young geophysicists. So when I look at older women, I see myself possibly as them, and there's not many to look at because there's not that many in our industry. So it can be difficult to see myself in a particular role if there's no one like me currently doing that role. So one way we're trying to address this is by having our blog where we recognize leading ladies, hashtag leading ladies. So every month we find someone in the community and ask them about their career, where they've been, what the issues they've faced, what their thoughts are on gender, and kind of just have a library of fabulous women you can go read about and see, hey, I could be like her someday. So on to employers, to help with retention, I think it's important to increase flexibility and thoughtfulness when assigning people to particular tasks. And this comes from quite a mining or a field position, where if you have women who are in relationships with other geoscientists and try to schedule them, so if they have children at home, try to schedule them so that one parent isn't in the field all the time, so they have some time together, or have these discussions about what's going on, just more than just what's going on at work, but have a make sure that there's communication there. And then, so I think there's an importance now in having a dialogue that makes sure that things work for everybody. And especially now in the 21st century, where things are a bit more, it's easy to, we have the internet, everything's online, it's easy to work with things. And I think this is important because if employers and employees can work together, then that builds more company loyalty, and you likely see that people will stay. Like, there's often the thing you might hear and saying that people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, for example. So if you can build that really good relationship with an employee, I think that builds a benefit for everybody. And the same thing goes to employees. Is you have to be mindful on your teams, but you also have to not be afraid to ask for what you need. And in some cases, that specific situation might not have come up. And if you're hesitant to ask, you might never figure out that it was actually a really easy change to do. So I think with retention, there's, people just talking more about it and seeing what the issues are and how things can be resolved. Okay, our second topic is the image. And by that, I mean what we look like to the outside world. So in the mining industry, I find can sometimes come off a bit very masculine in terms of how it's portrayed in media or in advertisements of different companies. And also, along with that, these stories that we tell from the field or from our work that tend to be very incredible, but also sometimes dangerous. And so these can, give a certain image of our what our field is. And perhaps if we want to be more inclusive of different genders and diversity, have to think a bit better about that. So one thing I want to address here too is unconscious bias. So I don't know if you're familiar with this case study, but Heidi Rosen is a Silicon Valley venture capitalist, and she was the subject of a case study at the Columbia Business School. And the professor presented half his class with a resume that had her name on it, and the other half with the name where he changed it to Howard. And the students were asked to rate how they liked Howard and Heidi. And in the end, it showed that they were equally competent, but they liked Howard, not Heidi. So, and that's really shows what unconscious bias is that based on your idea of someone's name and what their gender is, you make notions about them before you actually really know the story. So this is quite prevalent in our industry as well. So in resumes is one place where it pops up. So to try and battle unconscious bias, I'm trying to say, have inclusive language instead of saying, hey guys, try hello folks. And I was actually guilty of this when I first started this presentation, I said hello guys, or welcome everyone, and I said guys, not everyone. So it's a bit conscious. You have to try and work hard to change these kind of things we're used to doing. I think it's important to remove names and when looking at resumes and papers to reduce that unconscious bias. I know the SEG has done this for their, I recently reviewed a paper for geophysics, and I this year did not get the names of the authors or their affiliations. So before, and it's always the reviewer could stay blind. So, but now it's this double blind process, which I'm really in favor for, so that I can't judge against a particular paper because I have a bad association with that university or it's a competing group or something similar. So, and I think so. This would benefit women, but also minorities. And then finally, I think we should advocate or add unconscious bias training within companies. So then this will increase awareness of what it is, how to recognize it, and address it. So if you want to take a look at what's available online, you can Google Harvard Implicit. This is a test where you can see for yourself where your implicit biases lie. And then Cornell has an online course on this as well. Maybe other universities do as well. Another thing with our image is that there should be zero tolerance for harassment. So I've left the slide intentionally blank because I want to think about where harassment occurs. And it's not just in a mine or on an oil rig or in the field. It also happens in the office or at conferences, or there's an article yesterday on the news about a man harassing a woman on an airplane while they were flying across the country. So it's really, there can't be any tolerance for that kind of behavior if we want to make sure that women are welcome in our industry and keep them in there. So these topics are pretty much borrowed from Me Too minings. That's what their whole focus is on. And so within employers or universities, we can make sure that there's policies and procedures for how to deal with harassment at all levels. And I think now when we hear about stories about where this happens, we want to make sure that this is part of the safety culture and the announcements. So every day within a mine, we'll hear safety announcements. And I think this should be part of it. And it's really easy to add, but it's important. And then advertise that there is a zero tolerance policy in common rooms. So where people get together, be more open about it, that, this is the way it is. And it's not just something that you'll get handed on your first day on a new job saying, there's no tolerance, but it needs to be repeated and it should be done often. And for employees, if you're a victim, I hope you find a way to report it. And if you witness something, there's several ways that you can help a person get out of it. So you can interrupt a situation, you can call it a distraction, such as spilling a coffee, or you can tell the victim that they're needed somewhere else and get them out of there. And if it's really bad, then you should tell your superiors about it. So basically, don't be just a bystander, be active when you see this happening. And for that matter, even here with Women Geoscientists, we've told people that if there are any issues that they can reach out to us, or if they just want to talk about these things, just finding a way to talk about it and move forward. So the final thing is representation today. And by that, I mean representation at conferences and workshops, things like that. So if we take a look at any kind of conference in our field, we generally see that women are underrepresented in technical talks, but also as session chairs and panels. So these stats here are collected from the Exploration 17 conference in Toronto. And we can see that, the number of session chairs was 10% women, panels were 14%. On the Monday, there were no technical talks given by women, and as well as on Wednesday. And then on the Tuesday, we had about 18%. So these kind of observations are quite consistent across the different conferences I've been to, the people that are on our board have been to. And there's published research on this as well to show these kind of discrepancies. So if we kind of look at one particular paper that I'll look into who presents at this conference, we see that we've got majority of masters and PhDs who will attend conferences, as well as the early, mid, and senior positions from industry. And you can see here how the balance goes from male to female. Between male and female. So at the undergraduate level, even though there's a small percentage of students that attend conferences, we see a balance between men and women. And the same thing at the master's level, a little bit less at the PhD level, and less at the postdoc as well. But you can see how, as we go on in the years between early, mid, and senior, how that percentage of women decreases. So just keep that in mind for the next bit here. So for this particular conference, this is Geoscience conference. This paper has looked at the different presentation type. So we have poster, oral, and an invited oral as well. So that's a bit different. So invited oral is not submitting an abstract. It's where someone, a chair or a society has agreed to invite someone specifically. And so now if we look at the female presenters versus the male presenters, we see that, obviously there's a lot less female presenters in each of the categories, but remarkably, there's a lot less invited orals and a lot less orals than posters. So we see this decrease in women versus men as we go into more prestigious, so to speak, presentations. So I just took these numbers and wanted to divide them also between students and non-students. So in this particular conference, we had 149 total posters, 256 oral presentations. So the majority of posters were taken up by students at 62%. That's pretty standard, I think. Students tend to present with posters rather than oral talks. And the split there was about, roughly equal between the men and the women. When we then look at students presenting oral presentations, we start to drop to 40-60%. And that's probably on par with the split we saw at the master's PhD level, where we see a bit more men versus women. But if I now add the statistics on there for non-students, even at the poster level, we see that there's only 30% women giving posters versus 70% men. And for non-students giving oral presentations, now we're down to 20% versus 80%. So there's really a difference between students and non-students and where they present and how women are presenting at conferences. I think we can improve this on representation because it's going to ricochet throughout a person's entire career. So I think if you're allowed to, your company takes the time to send you to a conference, it's not just about presenting an idea or research or project. It's everything that comes with it, and those things that come with it, like the networking you do, or just the social activities you end up being to, or you talk to different companies, and all of these have effects on your career. So if you miss out on that, it can really set you back compared to someone who does have those opportunities. So if you're an employee at a particular company and you think your research or your work is important, then I think you should submit it and advocate for yourself and go ahead and try to get to those conferences. And for employers at the same time, they should be mindful about who they send to conferences. Are they sending the same people every year? Are they, making sure that they send a diverse group of people? Hopefully that they can also recognize that this will impact an employee's future. So again, you're investing into someone. And for societies like the SEG, I think it's important that you encourage balance and member representation on the committees and into chairing positions. And I know that Maria had sent out a letter to all the different committees last year to encourage committees that who runs the committees represents the SEG membership in terms of diversity and the amount of women versus men. And I thought that was great. And then we should be conscious of balance on invited sessions and workshops. So with the annual meeting coming up, we I've had some input into a workshop to make sure that it wasn't just men that are 60 years and older. Even though they are great researchers and they'd be wonderful to listen to, it's nice to have a bit more balance. So in summary, we've got retention. Want to fix that leaky pipeline, keep the younger generation within the industry so that we can have that workforce. And it's important to remember that it's more economic to keep people rather than rehire and retrain. Our image can use some adjusting. We need to address unconscious bias, and there's got to be zero tolerance for any kind of harassment. And then finally, we want better representation at conferences. So these are just a snapshot of the things that we're working on and the things that we're trying to learn more about and find ideas on how to address. So it's just a small smidgen of a much bigger problem. But I hope that you liked what this was, and that this can be a step off to other things and other ideas. So our website is wgccanada.org. There you'll find a link to sign up for our monthly newsletter. It's only once a month. We have our forum on Slack. You can go to that short link, or you can email us to get an invite, or you can also get at it through the website as well. So with that, I thank you for listening today, and thank you for attending. And I hope that this was a good way to start your morning or wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So now we will open the floor to questions from the attendees. Probably I'll start. It was definitely a very informative presentation. Really gets you thinking about how to mitigate this biases that all of us have. So I was just wondering, what got you started to studying the gender gap in geoscience? And as a geoscientist yourself, did you experience discrimination or some kind of, so do you mind sharing some experience from what you've seen?
I was at the Exploration 17 conference where this is where WGC started, and it was because we were really noticing the lack of women at that conference. And I personally am not the kind of person to be very outspoken and dare to speak my mind. Something I'm working on, but others did speak out. And then it was something that, as a PhD student in the past, decade going to conferences, it's something that I always noticed is that there weren't many women. And I never stood still to think about it. And my undergrad was very balanced. My graduate wasn't. And it's not, it was something that I was always aware of, but never really didn't know how to address or who to be involved with. So after Exploration 17, I did get involved, and I started learning more about it. And then I was like, well, this is not something I want for my future children, or, this is something that I wish I could also, that I could be a part of and help change. And especially now being in industry and not quite seeing those women leaders to look up to, like I always had professors to look up to, or peers that I really admired. And now I'm like, well, where are these other women that I can admire? So I don't want to fall through the leaky pipeline. And so if I can find ways to help others, then that was part of my motivation. Yeah. I see a couple questions here. AGU's new Ethics and Equity Center, ethicsandequitycenter.org. That's I'll check that out. I do have there's so I've at the end of my presentation, which I don't mind sharing, there's some papers from Nature Collection, has an entire thing on achieving diversity. And then we're gathering as much resources as we can, so thank you for that link. And then there's one In your transition from academia to professional career, do you see a change for the better in terms of gender diversity? Okay. Well, I guess I kind of, well, in undergrad, we were quite very balanced. I think we had 7 women in a class of 13 or 14. I mean, it was a very small geophysics class, but we were quite balanced. In grad school, I was the second PhD student in my professor's 40-year career, I believe. And then there was one more. So I don't know if that was, I mean, I doubt that's intentional. There were plenty of women in our department. I just wonder if that's something that specifically I chose to go into. And in professional wise, I do meet, I mean, I seek out women now when I am meeting people or at conferences, specifically because of this. But otherwise, you know, there's times where I'm in a meeting and it's all men. And so there's a question here. Where do the women go who leave through the leaky pipeline? That's a good question. And it's hard to keep records on those. I think some of them end up going into more management positions, or they, you know, might be going to getting an MBA and just, you know, transitioning out of technical roles. I think a lot of women also just leave, either because they have families and it's too difficult to maintain a travel-heavy career. I've heard of one person who left geology and went more into data science. So, I mean, you know, within geophysics, our skills are very translatable to other fields. So, not that tech industry is also very inclusive, but yeah, that's a really interesting question, is where do these women go and what did they end up doing? So that's the question. Yeah.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed is sort of whenever these kind of talks about women, diversity in geoscience, or I went to a really good one where tech presented barriers to women in mining, and it was interesting because the conference, as you sort of pointed out, was dominated by sort of a lot of male geoscientists and prospectors. However, when that talk came on, I noticed that all the men left, and it was probably like 80 to 90% women who were listening to that talk.
Yeah.
And so for things like this webinar and whatnot, I'm just curious if you see the same thing. And I also think, I'm curious, how do we sort of get rid of that perception that these sort of talks about gender diversity and women in mining and barriers that we're faced with are just for women? Because I noticed that you focus a lot on women supporting women, but I also feel like sometimes there's almost this separate thing where, sorry, I guess that's kind of what I'm saying.
No, and that's an excellent point. And it's something that I've thought of as well, because without the men in our industry, I don't think we can get much change happening. And that's because the men are in more senior positions, and they're usually in a position where they can have change happen. So I've been looking at ways to engage men, especially older men, because, you know, our industry is on the older side. And part of that is we have a lovely gentleman on our board. He's my boss too. He's very supportive of this. And he's been great at talking about this from a male perspective to other men and making sure that they, so.
I think what my question more was is how do we change the perception that these talks, like how do we get more diversity in these talks and these meetings and webinars and things like that?
Yeah, I do notice the same thing, that women will attend these diversity talks, and we really need the men there to be as well. So it's still something we're working on and trying to figure out as well. But I think having a couple key men advocate for us so that they can approach men, and it's a bit less, it doesn't feel like we're blaming them, or, it's not as invasive. And I also think if you're talking to men about it, is to try and find a way to relate to them, either if they have daughters or granddaughters. That's usually the best way to talk. Or if it's a younger man, if they have young families, and talking to them about, what kind of relationships they have at home. For example, I know one man has 4 children, and his wife left their job because, she was a microbiologist with a PhD, but, they decided, that she would focus on the children. And so every situation is unique, but, if you can find a way to relate to a man versus his own experiences, I found that that's usually the best way to go. So it's an ongoing thing. So there's a bunch of questions here on the chat things. I'm going to scroll up a little bit. Kanita's question. Hold on.
Yeah, we have a question from Juliana on have you seen examples on how companies within geoscience industry successfully retaining and advancing women?
Yeah, there's a couple initiatives going on right now. For example, BHP has their it's called 50-50 by 2025. So company-wide, they want to have 50% men, 50% women in the next 6 years. So they're working to increase their diversity. So that's you can go to their website and they've got a bunch of things explaining how they're doing this. So that's one company. I know the Engineers and Geoscientists BC Association wants to have 30 by 30, so 30% of professional engineers and geoscientists be women by 2030. In Canada, I don't know where the audience is roughly from, but in Canada we have to be licensed in order to practice. So they have strategies leading back to going back to grade school and high school to promote STEM fields. And like tech is working on this as well. So it's becoming more and more of an open discussion compared to even just 5 years ago. And I think companies are realizing that this is important, especially with the Me Too movement in the last couple of years. So companies are acknowledging it, but I think success in retaining and advancing women is still happening and needs to be figured out a bit better. Oh yeah, so can you use question? You mentioned that you yourself sometimes have trouble finding women role models who are also geoscientists. This is a huge point because it's a huge deterrent for entering geosciences and can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. How do you deal with this personally? Any experiences to share on this? So yeah, I do sometimes feel like I don't have any women to look up to, and especially as a soon-to-be parent, women who have balanced a really successful career while managing everything at home, even dealing with a lot of traveling. So I now reach out to, when I find a woman, I try to find out what's not just what her career is about, but also kind of how she does things at home. And the Leading Ladies blog has been really valuable to me that way because I learn about a lot of different women. So I think now compared to a couple years ago, I just actively seek out women, and I'll be more proactive about talking to them and introducing myself, and just trying to see if who they are and what I can learn from them. And then I wonder if there's another question. Yeah, I think that was.
I think we have one last question. How do you feel HR departments handle diversity and inclusion for geoscience project?
Well, that's one I'm not sure I can answer much on. So out of university, I did my PhD and then I did a short postdoc. So I know we had an HR department within the university. I don't know, I mean, if they handle or what their diversity and inclusion mandate was. Within my own company, we're very small, so we don't have an HR department. And within my office itself, we are 50-50 because there's only 2 of us. I mean, I really enjoy working in this really small company, but but we don't have a specific HR department. I must say though, we present at a lot of conferences and we have booths at the trade shows, and my boss has worked to have students, and particular women students, present little talks at our booth. So at the PDAC, we had quite a balanced schedule of talks from within our company and talks from students, and so we had quite a balance between men and women. So that was one way that we're making sure that some women get a bit more airtime, so to speak. And I thought that was great because I learned a lot about different parts of the world and different geologic problems too. Oh, there we go. Another resource for involving men in the conversation is MARC, Men Advocating Real Change. So that's catalyst.org/MARC. So, yeah, and according to BCG, 96% of organizations report progress when men are involved in gender diversity. And that doesn't surprise me. I think men here are key, and we need to make sure that they are part of the conversation and help us further this message and see change.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions we have for this webinar. So thank you very much again for sharing with us and talking about something so important. Just to promote the next webinar, our next speaker in April is Sonia Hernandez from Equinor Houston to tell us a bit more about the success and challenges of setting up a women's network group in a big company. So thanks very much to Sarah and everyone else who signed in for this webinar.
Great, thank you.